These are African rhythms, passed down to us through ancient spirits. Feel the spirit, a unifying force. Come on, move with the spirit.
From WSNC 90.5 FM, a broadcasting service and NPR affiliate of Winston-Salem State University. Welcome to Africa World Now Project. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. Today, thinking about Sudan with Alsarah of the Nubatones. Africa World Now Project is next. In order to understand the current sociopolitical conditions and deep Africana radical cultural influences moving in Sudan today, the long historical genealogy, the evolutions in physical geography, and the migration and interaction patterns of various communities of African peoples of the region must be explored. The geographical region now referred to as Sudan has evolved over time and space. Various descriptors have been placed upon and born from within the communities of peoples who lived and lives in this vast region. Despite the growth and retractions of the region, one of these descriptors that has lasted the evolution in time and space is Nubia. Nubia is the simplest term that defines the region that lies between Aswan and the modern state of Egypt at the first cataract, or rapids, on the Nile River, and the confluence of the White and Blue Nile just above the sixth cataract. In this physical geographical identification, we must also include the banks of the Nile and the adjacent land territories with which they interacted and controlled. Throughout history, Nubia and its component geographical parts had a number of other references. Among one of the earliest is Ta-Setiu, or the ancient Egyptian or Kemetic reference to the area as being the land of the bowpeople. Another Egyptian reference is Ta-Nehesi, which reflects the name of an ethnic group of Nubia. Some sections of Nubia also have a more specific nomenclature. Wawat is the ancient Kemetic name for essentially at least the northern part of Lower Nubia. Ertet rested adjacent to Awat, but went an immediate distance further south. The Greek invasions applied the term Dodekashoenos to describe Lower Nubia. Arab invasions used Butn al-Hajr, roughly translated as belly of stones, for the section of the Nile from the second cataract. Above the third cataract was the ancient Nubian region now known as Kerma. Research suggests that this area was also known to ancient Egyptians as Yam or Irim. Kush is another descriptor that was used to give reference to ancient Nubia. Nevertheless, Kush appears to be a broad descriptor, roughly inclusive of Nubia, and is the descriptor that many Nubians use to describe themselves. As used, Nubia is associated with an ancient word used for gold. The region was often referred to as the land of gold. Imperial and linguistic efforts to control and redefine the peoples and regions by the Greeks referred to Nubia as Ethiopia, which included at times parts of Libya. The central reason for this linguistic application was used to reference the phenotypical identification of the, quote, burnt faces of the Nubians. Other descriptors include Meroe. Christian Nubia refers to the three kingdoms of Nubata, Mukara, and Alwa that covers this region, and Nubia was the reference to the region until the end of the 19th century. It was at this time the name Sudan came into use, from the Arabic expression Balad as-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks, which was essentially an Arab translation of the Greek Ethiopia. It was further used throughout Muslim literature generally to refer to Africa beyond the Sahara. Sudan, as understood today, is a product of British imperialism and colonialism. Tariq Sheikh in Toward Sudan's Next Revolution, since its independence from the British in 1956, Sudan has experienced several popular revolutions, two of which successfully removed totalitarian dictators. But the current revolt appears different in every respect from its previous iterations. Tariq Sheikh continues, The former revolts were built both on a trade union movement at the height of its strength and an organized political movement present across Sudan's larger cities, especially in the capital. The Carrot Uprising took form in the cities far north of the capital, in places like Alsarah, a historically working-class center and the birthplace of Sudanese trade unionism. It then spread rapidly, with the wave hitting nearby like Berber and Dalmar, then Dakwala and Karima. The revolt moved east with Cardiff, Port Sudan, Kassala, then west in Abayat, Rahat, and the region along the White Nile. The continuity of Africana radical tradition follows the trajectories of resistance internationally. The influences and evolution of Africana radical thought and practices can be seen in Malik el-Shabaz's praxis. According to the article, X marks the spot mapping Malcolm X's encounter with Sudan. Though Malik el-Shabaz's travels in the Middle East and Africa put him in touch with the most revolutionary movements of his time, it was his ongoing contacts with students, scholars, and religious leaders from Sudan that had a truly transformative effect on his beliefs about race and religion. Today, we add to this genealogy and discourse a conversation that Africana collective member Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui and I had with Alsarah of the Nubatones. Alsarah is a singer, songwriter, band leader, and a somewhat reluctant ethnomusicologist. I would add she is an artist, thinker, and cultural theorist practitioner. Born in Khartoum, Sudan, she relocated to Yemen with her family before abruptly moving to the United States, finally feeling most at home in Brooklyn, New York, where she has been residing since 2004. She is a self-proclaimed practitioner of East African retro pop music. Working on various projects, she has toured both nationally and internationally. Alsarah and the Nubatones were born out of many dinner conversations between Alsarah and Rami Assar about Nubian songs of return, modern migration patterns, and the cultural exchanges between Sudan and Egypt. To learn more, visit her website, alsarah.com, ALSARAH.com, and explore the vast catalog of music. Our show is produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, and Ghana, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Enjoy the program.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm joined with Alsarah of the Nubatones, who is a singer, songwriter of what we can characterize as East African retro pop music. And so, Alsarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tasneem.
So I wanted to have you come by and have a conversation with us, especially as, we're in the midst of what's been going on, Sudanese protests and uprisings that have been going on since a little maybe mid-December. And I really wanted to put those protests in a context for us, a socio-political and cultural context. And I was so drawn to your music as an East African singer, and you come from Sudan as well. But the ways in which that you're thinking about the region and your work as an ethnomusicologist, as a singer, and to a certain extent as an activist in the work that you're bringing together. And so I'd like to, if you can, just introduce yourself to our audience and really kind of talk about some of the work that you've been doing recently.
Thank you again so much for having me. My name is Alsarah. I'm originally from Sudan. I live in Brooklyn, and I have a band called Alsarah and the Nubatones. We make what I like to call Sudanese and Nubian inspired East African retro pop. And for me, my work has always been about celebrating really the micro identities in music in order to really reach a macro wave of pop. So to me, pop has always been something that is not inseparate from tradition, that is not inseparable from culture, that is not inseparable from the political and environmental climates. The world is an extremely intersectional place, and music is one of the many circles in the midst of it. And it gets moved and shifted really strongly by people's movements and needs and desires. And every song to me is like a little sonic historical marker of that, from the simplest of traditional love songs to the most political, epic political songs to the simplest protest chants that get created on the spot, on the street, like we're witnessing today in Sudan. For me, my entire life really has been shifted by Sudan's political climate. There was a coup in 1989 that placed the current regime in place, and since then, kind of began a huge bleeding of Sudanese intelligentsia, a non-stop civil war, basically. From one region to the next, and many attempted revolts. The current revolution we're watching is not the first one. You know, there were attempts into 2011, 2013, and before that, Sudan has had a really healthy history of resilience and grassroots led and organized revolutions. You know, starting from '85 to now. So for me, watching this happen now, especially as someone who eventually ended up in the States because of the current regime's takeover and my parents' political activities, my work as an artist, body as a person is like an intersection of a lot of those politics. My life, where I ended up, my various paper statuses, all of that was very much shaped by that. So for me, watching the revolution happen now in its most powerful and successful form, it fills me with a kind of joy and a kind of hope that I hadn't really felt in a long time. And I resist all the comparisons people are having to it as being an Arab Spring or anything like that. Sudan's resistance to this regime has been ongoing, and what we've been witnessing from the onslaught of violences and genocides from Darfur to the Nubia Mountains, to the northern states with the dams, all of it is, and to the separation of the north and the south. All of that is something that Sudan's been going through for 30 years without people really necessarily paying attention to it. You know, Sudan went from being, and except for occasional moments where it becomes the darling child of whatever new nonprofit slogan it is, you know, Save Darfur or whatever. And when a revolution like this is really happening, you don't have a lot of coverage because the West's interest in a place like this is quote unquote stability. So I don't know, I'm watching the intersections of all of that. And for me, the most exciting part of all of it becomes when I go on online and I'm following the videos and the protests are coming out of here, and I watch a bunch of kids making up little kid songs being like, "Quwwat al-Bashir, quwwa fasida," and that's like an amazing video that just went viral through different WhatsApp videos of kids just making up songs against the revolution. It became against the regime, and it became a part of the revolution chants that are happening right now. And another beautiful part of this was also watching literally an explosion of local art coming from inside of Sudan, being circulated inside of Sudan through very organic forms, you know, like WhatsApp groups, and seeing this after seeing people struggle to be able to create art and put it out for so long, and now there's no care about an infrastructure or censorship. People, just the amount of art that's come out over the last 2 months has been mind-blowing and really, really inspiring.
Right, and then I wanted to actually ask you, because there's so many themes that you have, that you talked about, and I want us to kind of unpack that as our conversation goes, because you're also talking about race, class, gender, occupation. There's a lot of themes of migration, displacement, thinking about the cultural production of Sudan outside of Sudan in the diaspora, and then seeing what's happening right now, this correlation between an uprising and revolutionary potential and the emergence of all of this art that you're talking about that's coming out of Sudan right now, this cultural and critical consciousness that is emerging. And so I wanted to kind of take these at turn and really talk about, if you can, some of the influences for your music, because as we know, Sudan has a long history, right? Has informed culture, civilization, right? Knowledge production, arts, mathematics, science, all sorts of, we can go into the thousands of years of history of Sudan. But really, what tradition, sort of the tradition that your music draws from? I know in some interviews you've talked about Zanzibari Tarabuk, and have talked about the sort of Sudanese and Nubian music that has informed the ways that you're articulating and giving life to this expression.
Well, for me, I've always been extremely inspired by traditions, because for me, traditions are the oldest form of pop. So you learn from there. And for me specifically, growing up as a diaspora kid and being told, force-fed what everybody else told me was highbrow Sudanese art my whole life was a very frustrating thing for me, because I did not relate to this quote-unquote classical form of art that we had, that everyone considered to be the most representative Sudanese art. You know, big orchestra sounds, the golden era of Sudanese sound, as they say, from the 70s through the 80s. For me, what's always been the most inspiring about Sudanese music has been traditional things like أغاني البنات, or girls' music, أغاني الحكامات, أغاني الشلك, أغاني الوازا. These are things that that come from the peripheries of Sudan, they come from every different region of Sudan outside of Khartoum. Sudan's entire concept of its pop culture, I think, over the last 30 years and maybe 40 years has been so Khartoum-centered and so very much, Arab-centered and Muslim-centered, that we've ignored a lot of the other arts. And for me, what I found the most inspiration in was what would have been dubbed as lowbrow art, which was أغاني البنات and Zar music. Zar music is possession music. أغاني البنات, it's girls' music. It's music that's made by women, for women, composed by women. And the songs tend to be a little raunchy. A lot of them express everyday things in simple ways. So for me, it's always been about from the grassroots up is how I viewed, how I viewed everything, especially art and culture in Sudan. And so for me there's been an ignoring of that culture for a long time in Sudan. And for me to see people, just the explosions of art that are coming out now are breaking through this concept of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And this, by the way, started before the revolution, because like we said, the resistance started years and years ago. There's been many attempts. And you have in Sudan a style of music now called Zenig that also would be considered lowbrow art, but to me it's the most revolutionary underground Sudanese sound. And Sudan, in the midst of all of this dictatorship, has never ever wanted to deal really with its own social structural issues regarding our prejudices around ethnicities and tribes, and our prejudices around class, and how those things are so interwoven with each other. For me, the most amazing part about this revolution is that hopefully it can now clear the space for us to start having dialogue about the change that I think we need to see within each other.
This is James, and I wanted to ask a quick question based upon, the conceptualization of what's going on in Sudan right now, because you used the concept of revolution. How are folk at the grassroots level seeing what's going on right now, or how they're conceptualizing a society beyond what they're dealing with right now?
Right now on the grassroots level, you have everybody organizing around. One of the major organizers is the Association of Sudanese Professionals, which kind of started out as basically an illegal labor union a few years ago, and it's been one of the main organizers on the grounds. And it's just all the professionals in the country working together. All the students are working together. This is very much by the people, for the people type of thing. And it's happening not just in Khartoum. The resistance is happening all outside. And what's made this particular the last 2 months of the revolution, to me, what's made this a revolution that I know that in my mind has already succeeded, is the fact that it didn't start in Khartoum. It started outside of Khartoum and spilled in. But also in its going now, we are almost at the end of 2 months of this. We're going into this. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been arrested today and are in jail, but no one is stopping. Daily protests are still happening. And to me, what this means is that the revolution's already happened inside. People have broken the barriers of fear that have been the strongest weapon of this regime. This regime terrorized people. There is not a household in Sudan that didn't suffer from it in one way or another unless they worked inside the regime. And so the amount of fear that you can build in people over 30 years, after a while they start to even police their own thoughts inside their minds. So seeing this with the amount of art that's coming along with it, with the non-stop daily protests, it makes me feel like the revolution on the inside has already happened. So we've won, in my opinion. No matter what the result of this ends up being, internally as a people, we've broken the fear. And that's the most important part.
And the reason why I asked that question, because it's very, very important, because I'm thinking here about Al-Makal Cabral and the cultural production that precedes any revolution, that carries the revolution beyond. And I think that is important, and your answer is very, very important within the context of understanding that this is a long trajectory, historical, ancestral, and also for the region as well.
Absolutely. And, like Octavia Butler says, God is change, right? And what you touch, you change. What you change changes you. So I'm hoping this is a reciprocal change.
Sure. And I'm so happy that you mentioned, I was actually just reading a New York Times article from yesterday, and what is constantly kind of coming out is actually decentering the locations and the geographies that a lot of these uprisings and protestings that are coming from. So they didn't emerge and start in Khartoum, but it comes out of, sort of the central areas of Sudan. And that's why I saw so much of a relationship with your music, as you're also privileging and looking at the voices of, marginalized communities in Sudan, looking at the grassroots, looking at girls' music as well, looking at and some of the influences like from the Zanzibari Tarabuk, which also comes from women, from Black women, right, who were experiencing class oppression, were experiencing violence against women. And so I'm interested to say, like, the music or the arts that is coming out right now from Sudan that has been so underground, very suppressed because of the regime. Where are they drawing their inspiration from?
A lot of what's happening around the revolution art right now is being inspired by the streets. The songs that are being released are all being released based off of chants that are happening, taking place in the middle of the protests. They're all very organic. People have been doing these really interesting sessions where, in the tradition of Aghani al-Banat, there's these like a al-Gada, I don't know how to say. You have these gatherings where girls would get together and they would sing with a deluca, And so normally they're usually love songs, very simple. The rhythm is over, like usually a tum-tum, and they're usually done at weddings. So that's the style of Aghani al-Banat. There's a lot of singers now and a lot of girls. A singer like Asiya Medani, for example, that started a New Year's party. She started doing all these protest chants over the deluca, making it really fun and upbeat. And it started being kind of echoing all around Khartoum. A lot of other women were doing it as well. So to take something like that would be, I don't know. So to me, that was it's a perfect example of how history, of how music is really always will be a voice of the people, no matter what. It reflects what's happening in the moment. And so for a tradition of love songs about weddings to start making protest chants work with it, it was very organic and natural. It makes perfect sense.
Thank you. And I was wondering if you could just describe for our audience what a daluka is.
Oh, a daluka is a wide clay drum with a skin head. It basically looks like a very fat tabla.
I'm familiar with them, but I want to make sure that our audience is familiar with them as well. And there's one song that you had recorded, which I love, and it's part of this genre of girls' music, and it's from young girls from the Nubia region, Jubal al-Nuba. It's such a beautiful song, but there's something that about this music that also allows for itself to be more communal, more collaborative.
Absolutely. I think because of the way gender dynamics work in Sudan, and because of a lot of the shaming that happens around women putting themselves in public spheres and telling their own stories, for a lot of women, telling your stories happen through these songs where you can write as an anonymous, because it's not until recently, really, like in the last 15 years or so, that we're beginning to see people put credit to who wrote the lyrics to one of these types of songs. And that's, I think, mostly because we're getting a lot more male writers participating in it, because Aghani al-Banat have become Sudan's unofficial pop music. And so we're beginning to see people write down their lyrics and stuff. But traditionally speaking, every song would have thousands and thousands and thousands of lyrics, because anyone can just make them up. And you can make them up and say whatever you want without any fear of any ramifications from any kind of social shaming or getting in trouble with your family or any of that.
Just kind of following up on that question, though, too. So a lot of the music that you draw from, that tradition of music that you draw from, especially, this girls' music, and then going back to the Zanzibari Tarabuk, and singers like Siti Binti Saad and Bin Kunde, right, who address specifically oppression, violence against women, and they use their music to bring a consciousness, a critical consciousness of these experiences of women and young girls. And you had mentioned these chants that are coming out for these protest chants. Can you talk about what are some of the lyrics? What are some of the demands that people might be making through these protest chants?
Well, one of the biggest demands is tasqut bas, which just fall. That's what a lot of the big demands are against the Bashir. So the big call is tasqut bas. But let's see. I'm going to pull up some words for you. So you have I love this one. يا الماشي الامدرمان جيب لي معك بومبان البرلمان حيران من غضبة السكان. This one, a Sudanese poet named Tamadr Jibril actually posted that one. From the streets, we have that song قوة البشير قوة فاسدة. We also have, here, listen to this one. So that was Asya Medani basically giving some of the basic calls. It's like we went out for our country, not for the bread and not for the gas. Because when the protest first started, a lot of the attention and the conversation was like, oh, people are protesting because of the long lines for fuel and the long lines for bread. And I was just like, no, people are protesting because of 30 years of oppression and murder. And that was one, and so a lot of people were calling those chants in the beginning as well. But honestly, to me, what I consider like the overall chant that's become the number one hashtag that everyone's following is tasqut bas, which is just fall. And with this, because it's like everybody has different interests. You know, you have the leftists organizing them, you know, the regular everyday man organizing. But the idea at the end of the day is everyone wants the removal of this one regime, and then people will think about what needs to happen next. And I'm not saying it's going to be an easy pass next, but this has to change. And the time is now, and it's happening now. So follow the hashtags tasqut bas and Mudun Sudan tantafid. I don't really know how we can say that in English. Sudan uprisings and Sudan revolts. You can find a lot of those. Also follow protest chants. You will find a lot of that also. If you follow those hashtags, a lot of these things will pull up. I'm trying to repost everything under that hashtag now. There's a variety of really amazing online activists for people to follow. Yusra al-Bajir, Sarah, whose handle is BS on Blast, Khalid al-Bey is making amazing cartoons. Those people are making great, concise translations of everything that's happening daily in both English and Arabic.
And I want to shift a little bit and talk about some of the related to the consciousness, the critical consciousness, and the resistance that has been really building for like you said, the past 30 years. But shift a little bit in talking about the centrality of music, particularly in Sudanese culture and Sudanese cultural formation and identity. And when we're reading about Sudanese music, they talk about the heyday of Sudanese music being like the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. But there's also something that was really happening in terms of Sudanese cultural identities, right? Racial identities as well. And a lot of some of the music suppresses the African element. You mentioned Zar, like the music around spirit possession that also was a lot of women kind of were dominated in that space as well. Darabuk, and there are other forms of music. There's a hakiba as well, but that is more of the Arab and African elements too. But I wanted if you could focus primarily on the ways in which music has informed Sudanese identity, and also this tension between anti-Black racism and this Arab identity.
I mean, one of Sudan's largest identity crises is this regime trying to turn Sudan into an Arab Muslim nation when it is not. Sudan is predominantly not Muslim and now that it's just North Sudan, I guess you could say it is predominantly, Sudan is predominantly Muslim now, but it's definitely not Arab. That's a sure fact. And a lot of people don't identify that. And there is no room in what's being created as the Sudan national identity, for anyone's micro identity, celebrating their tribal contributions to this. And it is a form of extreme racism. And we don't deal with any of Sudan's history. The history of Arab slavery in Sudan is never talked about, is never dealt with. And why we have this need and desire to become a part of the Arab concept of being, when a lot of us are, when we're really not. Even the ones of us who do identify as of Arab descent, culturally, our heritage is so far, it's so mixed. Sudan is like the gateway between two worlds, it feels like. Well, actually, many, many worlds, mostly like 105 if you're counting all the tribes. So, I don't know, I feel like in Sudan, until we deal with our identity crisis, we can never actually create a whole Sudan. And to me, you can't deal with your identity crisis until you give full room and full light to every part of your identity and deal with the shame that you have around that. I worked and I grew up with protest music being a very regular part of Sudanese popular music. I grew up with Awardi's protest music playing regularly. All the major artists had protest songs. I grew up, one of my earliest musical memories was this tape from the Alliance of Creatives. Yeah, the Alliance of Creatives of like the left. It was basically a leftist tape that was being passed around with all these anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism songs. And I remember when the CPA was first signed, I even used one of those songs. I did a revamp of it, and I did it with another Sudanese artist named Odyssey, and the song was called Vote.
Give my people hope on this. I spoke on this and hopes it gets focused on like most of risks that occur in Africa. We gon' try to be socialist. Sudan, we trying to keep together. Other folks, they hope we split. So don't you sit up on your couch.
We are listening to a conversation that Africana collective member Dr. Ta-Setiu and I had with Alsarah of the Nubatones. Alsarah is a singer, songwriter, bandleader, and somewhat reluctant ethnomusicologist. I would also add she is an artist, thinker, and cultural theorist practitioner. Born in Khartoum, Sudan, she relocated to Yemen with her family before abruptly moving to the United States, finally feeling most at home in Brooklyn, New York, where she has been residing since 2004. She is a self-proclaimed practitioner of East African retro pop music. Working on various projects, she has toured both nationally and internationally. To learn more, visit alsarah.com, ALSARAH.com, and explore the vast catalog of music. Continue to enjoy the program.
This was one of the earliest songs I grew up listening to. Because my parents were political activists, I grew up in a very political climate. And to me, even when I look at the rest of Sudan's culture, political music was always a part of our music because we talked about it more openly. And I think because Sudan's seen so many changes since its independence in 1956, and all those changes, within them, we never ever discuss the reality of our own prejudices, of our own problems, because we deny a lot of our own history. So I'm hoping this new round of changes with the way the protest chants are going is just going to further feed into that body of music that already exists in Sudan. Sudan is very rich in political protest music written by the people for the people. So to me, this is just a continuation of that. Music is a part of all aspects of Sudanese lives. And so to have ended up ever like we did in a place in the 90s where people thought it would be a sin, it's just sad to me.
Right. And it is so interesting because I've had conversations, especially, with other activists that are not Sudanese. And they've talked about, Sudan, no one rose up when the military coup happened. And I'm like, that's not true. That's not possible. So, and it's great to hear this conversation just about, all of these major artists all had protest music as part of their repertoire, as part of their cultural and musical production as well. And I think part of what is happening right now with these protests and these various movements is bringing to light more of the resistance that's been happening over the past 30 years, which I don't think outside of, I think, the East African region that too many people were aware of or focused on.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. People weren't aware of what was happening, so they assumed it never happened, which is a very strange way to look at the world. And to me, it's just like, I don't know, I feel like evidence of that is that like my entire body of work from its beginning is full of protest songs because we've been going from one attempted revolution to the next. From my earliest releases, like that song Vote. After it, I released an album called Silt. I had a song on it called Fugu. And before that, and that song is also about the revolution. My last album, Manara, we had a song on it called Nar. Also actually that one, the chorus, it goes, La lil-sulta wa la lil-istimar. Say no to the government, say no to colonization. Because it seems like that's always the options, especially when you look around and you see what's happening in Syria, in Yemen. And it seemed like in order to take down a dictatorship, now you're watching the rest of the world rip the place apart, vying for parts, like in a new form of colonization that we just have other names for. So I don't know, the revolution and the resistance in Sudan has been happening for a long time, but we have a long way to go because even after we change the regime, we have another real long way to go to work on ourselves. And I don't know, it's like I've been watching all of this happen and feeling like, I wrote Fugu, I wrote Nar, and those songs came to me before the revolution really started in this form that it's in, and now I'm gathering all these protest chants as I'm watching and looking around. I'm gathering them all, and all that comes out of me as I'm thinking are love songs. And I find that to be an interesting reaction to what's happening on the ground.
That is an interesting reaction. But at the same time, I also understand it too, right? So music really is the soul and consciousness of the people as well too. And so when you see this opportunity or this moment that's erupting, this sort of, this crisis and a possibility of different elements of a new society that were always there that are trying to take form and take shape and actually really shift and create this alternative for Sudan. And I wanted to know if you can kind of because you also see yourself as, even the way that you've characterized your music, as more holistic within the entire East African region, right? So
yes.
Not something that's just located within Sudan. And if we think about it, Sudan is a product of, this nation state project that had no regard for the different groups of people, ethnicities that find themselves parts in Egypt, parts in Sudan, parts in different regions. Chad, right?
In Eritrea, like Sudan was 7 different empires. Darfur was its own country until 1917. This is not far away history. So when I think of that, I realize what a failure our idea of our nation is, and why should I stay inside such a tiny, tiny little frame when I can join forces with all my brothers and sisters in East Africa. We're all suffering from really similar stories, just told in different ways. Why not look at us as part of a whole? Why not look at the geography completely different? A geography based on why not look at our borders based on geography as opposed to based on imaginary lines? You know what I mean? To me, anywhere the Nile flows is somewhere I could have easily traveled because that's an old road, the oldest road we had. You know, the port of Sawakin in East Sudan, in Eastern Sudan, it was a real hub of meeting people from, the Asian Peninsula, traders coming up from Zanzibar, people going down to Zanzibar. You had all, and you see that reflected in the region's faces, culturally, linguistically, habitually, in every way, really. Like, people, you see that. And to me, I felt that also when I was being introduced to the music of Zanzibar and to the music of Bikudude, one of my all-time heroes. That woman it made me realize how blind I had been about our location in the world. We're taught to think about our borders in such a crazy way, when really we're a part of this larger thing. And that to me makes way more sense. Like, in terms of ethnically, historically, when you look at the way people move, traditionally, movement is the most traditional human habit. It was our earliest response to poverty. It was our earliest response to anything. We have always moved. We will never stop moving.
And that leads me to this question of thinking about how migration, displacement, diaspora consciousness really functions in your work. And I know you were involved in the Nile project, which was a collaboration of artists that are coming from all over that Nile Valley region, too. So from Eritrea, from Egypt, from Sudan, from Burundi, right, from Ethiopia, from Chad, all of these different areas that we're really trying to raise a critical consciousness around, water really being the source of life, right? Water, the Nile coming through, like, as you said before, so beautifully, the highway that was the original highway for these regions. But really thinking of even your own experience coming from this you have experience of multiple migrations, and then recently with the 45th and these sort of resurgence of travel bans as well, that makes movement even more complicated for what you're rightly stating is migration for human beings is normal and natural. We've been doing this for thousands of years, for millennia. And so can you talk about the way that even as a Sudanese woman, an East African woman outside of this region is really, in a lot of ways, so much speaking the soul of the people of Sudan?
I don't know if I'm speaking for the souls of anybody. It's really hard to think of yourself as speaking for other people, because while I'm watching this revolution from here, from the States, having lived here for 20 years, being the child of political activists that were here on political asylum, and that's how we ended up here, watching this and knowing also that while it's so personal to me and I'm so invested in it and I speak to everyone I can about it, my conversation with my people has always wanted to be about not just the politics of this. I've always only wanted to discuss the revolution on the inside, right? And I'm finally seeing the space for that. And a part of me wishes I could just be doing things on the ground, helping, but then at the same time I'm realizing if you'd been away from something for so many years, is it yours still or is it not? How does that even work? I don't know. This revolution is raising a lot of questions for me on a personal level. I don't know. I think I've strayed from your question. I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. And part of it is, yes, and I don't want to assume that and that's also dangerous, that we're not speaking for anyone's soul, but really kind of, in a way, expressing the aspirations and desires and even the ways at which people are talking about their everyday reality by making this music more accessible and available to a wider region, and ways in which people can actually develop forms of solidarity as well with girls' music from the Nubia Mountains that can connect to, movements of women that are organizing either in the Americas, in Venezuela, or in Brazil, too, that there's something that is also very much like of the human experience that's being communicated, I think. And so my last question, and just kind of wanted to wrap up, is just to thinking about like what some of your future projects look like and how this what's happening right now in Sudan, if that you spoke a little bit about that, but kind of like shifting some of your artistic expression or some of the art that you're creating right now.
Well, for me the most significant shift has been watching myself just pouring out love song after love song, it feels like. I started actually recording last week our new album with the Nubatones, and we've been taking creative sabbaticals over the last couple of months. And so for me, the response to this music is happening. The response to what's happening on the ground is already happening musically inside of me, right? But it's happening musically inside of me in a way that feels more romantic than I've ever really felt towards Sudan. My feelings towards Sudan have never been romantic. They've always been fraught with tension and with a love-hate kind of dynamic. And because for me, I've always worried that, how do you say? Okay, let me reorganize my thoughts. Aghani al-Banat is the kind of music that grew up in Sudan by women and for women, and it grew up in Khartoum, in the central meeting place of all the different tribes and regions of Sudan. It's a sound that's based on a DIY thing, and it's all about the meeting of all the different peoples. We need each other to make change happen. Change needs to happen in a global format. And in order for it to happen in a global format, it needs to happen in a micro format. And that micro format happens with just one experience one person has, where they can stand in a room somewhere and be quiet long enough and listen long enough to just learn something new about someone different. And to me, that's the essence of music. And that's the essence, and that's why music is essentially a social act. You know, it's the idea of it is that if you want to make music, if you want to consume music, if you want to participate in music, you have to be quiet long enough to listen so that you can understand what's happening. And once you're quiet long enough to listen, change is already happening. So I am excited about the changes coming and about all of us being in one room together, quietly listening.
As we wrap this conversation up, and listening is revolutionary in its own right?
Yeah.
So as we wrap up and kind of end this conversation, and this has been a great conversation, and I'm glad you was able to share your time with us today and also our listeners, can you share where people can follow you and your work? And also, do you know of any ways that people can be engaged or in solidarity with this important movement that's going on right now?
Yes. You can follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter, Alsarah 5000. If you follow me on Twitter, this is where you'll see all my political thoughts. If you find me on Instagram, it's where you'll see all my clothes. And if you follow us on Facebook, you'll see all of that. Alsarah 5000 or Alsarah and the Nubatones. ALSARAH 5000, the number. Alsarah and the Nubatones is ALSARAH and AND, the Nubatones. THNUBATONES. I please follow the hashtag Sudan Uprisings and Sudan Revolts. There's demonstrations happening all around the United States and all around Europe in solidarity with what's going on in Sudan. Retweet those hashtags as much as you can, share them as much as you can, so things can trend, and so that we can hopefully get the needed media coverage for at least there to be some sort of accountability for the number of protesters that have been shot and killed over the last 2 months and are continuing to be shot and killed, the hundreds of people in jail without any due process of any kind. So if anyone can follow that, that'd be great. We do not need any Western interference at this particular junction, I don't think, and I really don't recommend it, mostly with the tenacious relationship around sanctions and such. So I recommend right now, please stay aware. Please retweet, share with all your friends, share as much knowledge as possible. Follow BS on Blast. Follow Yusra al-Hajr on all platforms. There's daily updates in both English and Arabic, and they have all kinds of resources posting there. In terms of like videos that have been organized and archives by people. This is a revolution that's really dependent on citizen journalism.
And we'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
أسياد الحضارة، أسياد الطيبة، أسياد الإيمان. يا إما شفت الحبايب قاموا قالوا قاموا قالوا قاموا قالوا قالوا السلام، قالوا السلام يا يما رد السلام.
That's it for Africa World Now Project for this week. I would like to thank you for joining us today and look forward to spending time with you next week. We can be reached through all your regular social media platforms. Email africaworldnowproject@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at AFWRLDNWPRJ. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. The Africa World Now Project Collective consists of international media journalist, executive producer, and human rights activist Muizu Mutali, Africa World Now Project media correspondent Funda Ngunda, senior research, content contributor, and production director Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, senior researcher and content contributor and production associate Dr. Josh Myers, associate producer and content contributor Dr. Keisha Khan Perry, technology advisor is Byron Gray of Grayworks Technology, and creative director is Judah Pope. Africa World Now Project is heard every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on WSNC, NPR affiliate and broadcasting service of Winston-Salem State University. Shows are archived weekly on SoundCloud. Search Africa World Now Project. Until next week, be safe, be peaceful, and above all, be intelligent.